Door handles. Something you likely spend about 0 minutes per day thinking about. But not me. Ever since reading the classic books The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman and The Humane Interface by Jef Raskin, I've been obsessed with good design of everyday objects, including door handles. While I love my Model Y, the #1 complaint I have about it is the outer door handles. My humble opinion, they suck and they need a complete overhaul. Fine, you might say, they're not the greatest, but who really cares? I get by using them and the rest of the car works amazingly, including the inner door handles, so why does it really matter? Well, let me tell you why. Let's take a deep dive into door handles, so-called affordances, the challenge of designing a good door handle, and why designing them right is so important. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I have a feeling I'm going to catch some flack for this episode. It's going to be a deep dive. It's going to be really technical. I would just say, please hear me out. First of all, I love my Tesla Model Y, but we should never assume something is the best it can be in all aspects. I mean, that's life, right? It's always developing and it's always changing. Tesla changes things all the time on their cars to improve them, but really the door handles have remained pretty much the same since the introduction of the Model 3 about 5 years ago. Given how poor the design is, this is really astounding in my humble opinion. So first, let's take a look at some video comparing the Mazda CX5 door handle, which in my opinion is quite good, with the Tesla Model 3's door handle. So this is what I consider a very good door handle. It succeeds on every front. So you can push this button as you're opening it. It's got very nice affordance. It's quite obvious what you're supposed to do with this. The only real downside to it is, of course, the flushness aspect of it, because it does stick out, so it causes that. And it can get scratches in there, which you can see because your fingernails rub against it. So really, aside from that, however, this is a really, really well done door. It's very robust, very simple. It's got the electronics built in, of course, right there with the push button. Don't need the lock part of it, obviously, but anyway, but that is a well-designed door handle. The Model Y and Model 3 door handles, on the other hand, not so good. Doesn't scratch, so that's a good thing. Again, counterintuitive. You don't know you're supposed to push this without text that tells you that. From this angle, left hand forward on the driver's side, well, at least in the United States, but anyway, on the left side of the car, it does work okay. But let's reconsider this now. So one-handed use again, right? Always door handles should be able to be used one-handed. If you come at this and you've got stuff in your left hand, how do you do this, right? You're having to push with like this kind of finger and then do a bizarre sort of move like that, right? And of course, if you come at it from the front with your left hand, you're having to reach over like this and then kind of like scoot your finger this way. And again, with your right hand, you're having to like kind of push it in a weird way and pull it. So it's all very, very icky. It's not ambidextrous. It's not front-back equivalent, or front-back ambidextrous, I guess. It is, of course, flush, so it succeeds in that area, but it is by no means clear. The affordances are poor in this, right? You assume that you're going to pull a door handle, so everyone comes along going like, well, where the hell does my hand go to get in there, right? So it is not at all obvious that what you have to do is push this, but beyond that, even after you get used to this door, it is not usable. It's only usable from this one angle. If you're coming at it from behind with your left hand out on the left-hand side or with your right hand out on the other side, it is pretty reasonable, right? That's okay. That kind of motion is pretty reasonable. From every other angle, it sucks. So it really does need reworking. So as you can see from those videos, there's really only one case in which the Tesla Model 3 door handle works well. If you're coming from the back end of the vehicle towards the front and you reach out with your opposite hand. So in other words, if you're on the left side of the car, you don't reach out with your right hand, which is closest, you reach out with your left. Then you can use your thumb to push in and you can pull out. That's not ideal. That means that the 3 other one-handed cases, which are you're reaching backwards with your left hand on the left-hand side, so you have to use your pinky, or you're using your right hand, which is just completely uncoordinated on that side of the car. So this means that as opposed to the Mazda, which is quite ambidextrous, right? It doesn't really matter what angle you approach it from, hand underneath, hand on top, right hand, left hand, etc. The only problem with it is that the little button that you have to push to unlock it is kind of annoying in its position. It would be nice if there were 2 of them or something. It always seems like I'm coming from the car from the wrong angle with these cars. So anyway, so for the most part, that handle is pretty good. The 2 things that it falls down on, we're going to talk about the design elements elements later on. One of them is that it scratches quite easily because you have to put your fingernails in that little cup. And the other one is, of course, the thing that really drives Tesla crazy apparently is that it's not flush to the surface of the car. So it creates a small amount of vortices and stuff. I think Tesla's a little bit too concerned with that and that they could get away with having something that wasn't totally flush, but that seems to be their number one concern. The other aspect of this, of course, is that as a first-time user of the car, the Mazda has very, very clear affordances, while the Tesla has really, really unclear affordances. So of course, I'm assuming you're asking, what the heck is an affordance? An affordance, as described by Norman in his book for physical objects and Raskin for his GUI or graphic user interface objects, is something that tells you how an object is supposed to be used. My basic giveaway is if you have to write text in English or whatever language you speak on that object to tell you how to use it, you have failed at your design. So what that means, if you have a door and you have to put push on the door or pull on the door, you have failed in the design of the door handle, because the door handle should tell you exactly how it's supposed to be used. There's a thing called a Norman door, which is basically a door with a long bar across the middle, in which it is unclear whether you're supposed to push or pull that bar. And this comes from the fact that Norman actually used this example in his book to show how poor a design can be for an everyday object. And of course, Raskin in the 1980s transferred this to the Macintosh graphic user interface. And he showed how a desktop metaphor, for example, is a really, really good idea because you have things that give affordances. Even though it's a virtual object made out of pixels, we're now so used to this we don't really think about it, but before that it was all command line stuff and it was all hidden things. You had to have the secret code of CD/whatever to change directories or something. Now you just look for a little folder or a little disk icon or something and you double click it and it pops up. So this is the kind of stuff that was being transferred from everyday objects over to graphic user interface objects. But again, with a GUI, you know if you have to write text on the GUI that you have failed at that GUI. The affordance is not what it's supposed to be. So one of the really interesting takeaways from these two books is that it's not your fault. If you have problems dealing with, let's just say a physical object for now, since that's what we're dealing with a door handle, if you can't utilize that door handle properly, that's not your fault. That's the designer's fault. Your monkey brain from billions of years of evolution should just be able to interact with that object no problem at all. And if we look at these two pictures, one is from the New York City taxi service showing the Model 3 with some text that demonstrates how you're supposed to open the door, and also more recently the Las Vegas loop tunnel, which also has the same markings on the back of the car. That indicates that this door handle does not have proper affordances. What you should have for a handle that you're supposed to pull is some sort of object where your hand comfortably fits inside of it. So in general, kind of a cylindrical object, or also maybe something more like a flap, which used to be more popular, but now it's more of a cylinder object. But you should be able to wrap your hand around it and pull the object. That's the idea. That's an affordance that tells you how the door handle is supposed to be used. And that's why the Mazda CX5's door handle is significantly better in terms of usability than is the Tesla one. All right, I'm sure what you're saying now is like, okay, so it's slightly annoying, it's not as good as it could be, but why does this actually matter? Let's concentrate on more important things. Well, it does matter. Number one, the door handle is literally the first thing you interact with the car physically, right? You look at the car first, but the first time you walk up to any car, not just a Tesla, you touch the door handle to try to open up the door. So that means that you are interacting with that first, and if that gives you confusion or if it gives you a bad experience, that means that you're thinking this car is a bad car or a confusing car. You're projecting things from the door handle into the rest of the car, and that's a really, really bad thing. But beyond that, let's say you buy a Tesla like we have, and you drive it all the time, like every day, so you're getting in and out of the car multiple times a day. Well, it's a frustration rather than a joy every single time you use that. It can be done better, and it must be done better, and Tesla needs to do a better job. All right, so we have an engineering and design problem. Let's try to break this down a little bit. I think the first thing we need is clarity, so let's do a problem statement first. Car door handles are pull-type door handles and thus require a handle built around a partially closed human hand that affords pulling with a degree of force. This requires a gap between it and the door it's used to open. That gap between the handle and the door is actually a really important thing, and that's one of the problems that Tesla has, right? You can't wrap your hand around something if it's flush. And so Tesla has a problem with that, and all design is going to have a problem if you want to design the handle flush and yet utilize that handle. Tesla handles for the Model 3 and Model Y currently require a hidden push before pulling, which is counterintuitive, non-ambidextrous, and challenging to use with one hand under many circumstances. They need to be designed better. Now I want to make a note here that the Model S and Model X door handles are excellent. They're really cool. They kind of push out and present themselves to you as you get close to the car. So that's really, really neat. The problem with that is that's expensive, it's heavy, and it's somewhat fiddly. It's another point of failure for the car. So clearly for the more mass market Model 3 and Model Y, Tesla wants to get away from that. They want to use something simpler. So let's go ahead and list the requirements that we need for this door handle. Number one, it needs to be flush. Supposedly this is so there's no drag, but you know, I don't think that's really the case. I can't imagine it causes more drag than the side view mirrors and stuff. So anyway, but for Tesla, this seems to be a really, really important thing. The handle also needs to be electromechanical, which means that part of it needs to unlock the door, right? So some portion of the door handle activation needs to communicate with the car itself and ask whether the car should be unlocked during that sequence. The rest of it is mechanical, so it needs to be able to be pulled, which physically unlocks some sort of mechanism in the car, which goes over a pin, and as it does that, you can pull the door open. The handle also needs to have an obvious affordance. In other words, it needs to say, "pull me," without having text on it. It needs to be built for one-handed usage, it needs to be built for ambidextrous usage, and it needs to be built so you can approach it from the front or the back without a problem. Also, the door handle needs to be inexpensive, lightweight, uncomplicated, robust, not freeze when you have rain that freezes, and doesn't scratch the paint around it. So obviously here we have an engineering problem. You can't design all of these things equally well, and that is engineering. Engineering is always a compromise. It's like, what do I choose to do at the expense of something else? So we're not going to be able to do all of these things equally well, but we need to do most of them well and the most important things well. And one thing I'll throw out here is that in Discord conversations, some people have said, well, look, this is not going to be necessary anymore because we can have the door just pop open. You know, eventually Tesla's going to design something where as you approach the car door actually just opens up and you just pull it out and it's all fine. I will argue that number one, this could be rather expensive and fiddly to build, but number two, and more importantly, it's going to be annoying as hell. Imagine every time you walk past the car, the door pops open. That means you have to then open it up fully and close it every single time you walk by the car. How is the car going to know when you're actually intending to get in the car and start driving versus, you know, just passing it by in the driveway or something like that? So yeah, AI might be able to help with that, but it's really an annoyance. And so if Andre Karpathy and company can go ahead and build an AI that's good enough to know that I'm actually intending to get in the car and drive, and it can then open the door for me, then, you know, good for you guys. I will back off and not talk about car door handles anymore. But until that happens, we need to think about the physical object, the physical door handle. So where does the current door handle fail? Well, it fails at obvious affordance, and that's obvious because they have to keep putting text on the door to explain how to use it. That weird sort of motion where you have to push in with your thumb, grab the thing, and then pull out the handle is very, very unintuitive. The handle also fails at one-handed / ambidextrous / front-back usage. And also the door handle is subject to freezing and freezing rain. So that's a lot of failures, including some very, very important ones, all for the benefit of having a flush door handle. So in order to kind of go back to first principles and think about this door handle again, let's rank the importance of all of these factors. In the first tier thing, Tesla obviously believes that no drag is the most important element and it needs to be totally flush. I would argue that this is not really the case, and given the side view mirrors and even the little side camera pods that stick out a little bit, that they're getting a little overboard with that. But let's just go with this assumption and try to make it flush. Also in the first tier, it needs to be robust. In other words, it needs to be able to be used a lot. It needs to be electromechanical, which means it needs to be mostly a mechanical device and not motor-based or something like that. It needs to provide one-handed usage, it needs to be ambidextrous for both hands, and it needs to have front-back equivalence, so no matter which direction you're approaching the car from, it's okay. And of course, it should show a proper affordance that says, "pull me." In the second tier of importance, we can put maybe lightweight, inexpensive, and uncomplicated. And in the third tier of importance, unless you live someplace where it rains and freezes all the time, doesn't scratch the paint and doesn't freeze, so I'll put that kind of lower than everything else. So given all of those factors, let's take a pass at designing something that works for as many of these things as possible. Now, of course, you'll notice that I'm putting myself on the line today. I'm the kind of person where I'm like, if I'm going to critique something, I better have an alternate idea or a design for it. This is just a first pass. There are many problems with the design still, so I'm not saying this is perfect by any means, but hopefully at least it will get somebody, maybe at Tesla, to start thinking about this in a different way, and maybe we could start a conversation and maybe things will get better from there. And by the way, if you want to see more about my creative / design work process, watch this Model 2 design video that I did many, many moons ago. In fact, I think it was about a year ago. But anyway, I go into the process on how I think about all of this stuff, so it might be valuable to watch that. But anyway, after thinking about this probably way too long and coming up with a lot of sketches and ideas that I was like, maybe works, maybe doesn't work, I came up with what I think covers most of the bases. It doesn't have the most clear affordance in the world, but it's got a better affordance than the current handles, and it does a lot of other things really well. So I did a quick 3D animation mock-up, and I show like a human hand pushing the door handle. You see that the door handle itself pops open. You then grab it with your hand, so there's a handle that's exposed. You pull it out and open the door, of course. And then as you go to close it, as you close the door, there's a mechanical linkage between the door itself and the door handle, which pulls the door handle back in flush to the door. The electrical / locking part of it is when you push the door handle in at the beginning, it actually engages a switch, which then, certifies with the car that you are the owner of the car and then unlocks the car. So by the time you're actually grabbing the handle, the car is already unlocked. This is actually a problem with the current door handle as well. The current Tesla model, sometimes when you push it in with your thumb, you have to hold on for just a second before the door disengages and decides to unlock for you. So I think that push-pull sort of thing will actually help. And then of course the mechanical aspect is that you pull the door with your physical body the rest of the way. Now the problem of course is on the far end. When you close the door, there has to be a linkage between the door. In other words, the pin that the door goes around and locks, there needs to be another linkage which then associates itself with the door handle, which forces the door handle closed. That adds complexity, adds weight, adds points of failure, etc. So I know that's not the greatest thing in the world. And additionally, the affordance is not as good as it could be because of course you can't see immediately where the handle is. But of course, if the handle is colored differently, the first thing people do if they can't pull is they're going to poke at it. So they'll poke at it, the door handle will open, and then that makes a lot more sense. And then of course, it's obvious once it's open, there's a handle so that you can pull that handle open. So complexity in terms of closing the door and forcing that door handle back closed again is a problem. And the affordance is not quite as clear as it could be. But designing something that's flush and something that has to have a place where you can put your hand inside of it, which requires a gap, is a problematic situation. So that was the best compromise I could come up with, at least in a couple of days of thinking about this. And of course, if Tesla wanted to, they could also build in something where as you approach the car, either through vision or RFID with your phone or something, that as the car realized that you were coming towards it, it could actually open up that door handle. Now, that would require a motorized setup inside the car that would allow it to release and then pull it back in again. So I think that's not ideal in this circumstance because we're trying to keep the cost and the weight and the complexity down as much as possible. So keeping it all as mechanical as possible is probably the best thing. Again, here we're talking about mass market cars, so we're trying to keep things as simple and efficient and inexpensive as possible to build. So there you have it. I have a door handle that I've designed that is not perfect by any means. Again, it's engineering, it's always a trade-off, but I am pretty convinced that it is better than the current version of the Model Y and Model 3 door handle. And remember, we've got the Cybertruck coming up soon, so they really need to think about this quite a bit because the Cybertruck is also supposed to be mass market and simple to build, and it needs to be super bulletproof in terms of the quality of the handle because there you're going to be having, construction workers, people who are muddy, dirty. It's going to be in nasty environments, so that needs to be even more robust than what we currently have. So it's definitely high time for Tesla to think about their door handles again, and they really need to consider how to improve this because it is, in my mind, one of the worst aspects of the car. That and the turning radius, which by the way is a joke almost. You have to do a 3-point turn in a 4-lane highway to be able to make a U-turn or something. It's pretty ridiculous how bad the turning radius is, but I will give them that. I know electric motors make that difficult to do. So that doesn't bother me nearly as much as the door handle because the door handle is something that I deal with every single day. So Tesla, whether or not you like my idea for a door handle, you really need to sick your engineers on this problem and fix this because it's not good. You have a bunch of smart people who work there, so you can definitely do better. So please do. Alrighty, I hope you found this episode fun and informative. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people in the comments who are not going to be happy about my criticizing Tesla for anything. I'm doing this out of generosity. I think that this is something they can do to make the car even better. So I'm not critiquing them out of hatred or anything like that. I'm critiquing them to hopefully help them make the car better. Anyway, if you did enjoy the episode, please do like it so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing if you like this kind of stuff. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You all are wonderful. Thank you all so much for the help. I really do appreciate it. And don't forget about Webull, which is a stock and crypto trading platform. If you look in the description, you click on the link and open an account, you get one stock valued at up to $250. And if you fund the account with $100 or more, you get a second free stock valued at up to $1,600. So that is a fantastic deal. Check it out in the description. description. And of course, don't forget about our merch store, which has awesome t-shirts like Tesla Rockets for the People, Don't Mess with Tesla, other t-shirts, tumblers, mugs, etc. So check out the link in the description. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how clicking a link and going shopping helps the channel. Thank you. And as always, please feel free to ask me questions in the comments or at my email address, which is drknowitallknows@gmail.com. Till next time, bye-bye.